In the decades preceding their war for independence, Americans were struggling to determine who they were. Were they Englishmen, or had they become something else? Did they want to be Englishmen, or now did they aspire to a different identity? When the Puritans came to America in the early 17th century, they believed that, like the ancient Israelites, they'd been liberated from oppression by God and were bound by a covenant to establish a pure Christian commonwealth in the New World. Promoters of North American colonization had a different goal in the New World, namely, exploiting its resources to make a profit for England. At the dawn of the 18th century, the ideas of Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, Isaac Newton, and Voltaire were challenging accepted knowledge with openness, investigation, and science. And expanding networks of commercialization offered people opportunities to own things and have experiences previously unimaginable to them. In the face of this, clergy loyal to the crown sought to impose ecclesiastical laws that demanded conformity and compliance, denying individuals access to membership, sacraments, and any role in their own salvation. Forced to choose between the Puritan vision and loyalty to the crown, many third-generation Americans replaced the solemn covenant of their forebears with a new secularized halfway covenant, making them sinners in the hands of an angry God.
The halfway covenant was a way that you could assent to truth, but not have to live it. And Jonathan Edwards would begin a series of messages on justification by faith, that you're no longer just responsible to the King of England or the Church of England. You had to have a personal relationship with God.
Men's hands cannot be strong when God rises up. The strongest have no power to resist him. You especially now have an extraordinary opportunity. Let everyone flee out of Sodom.
Edwards' message challenged staid, secular New Englanders to stop being profit-driven Englishmen and start being Americans, personally responsible to God. Many who had been passive about their faith suddenly became intense, committed believers. Edwards called out the hypocrisy of the Anglican Church and demanded that Americans be better. He didn't shrink from the ideas of the Enlightenment, he used them, believing that both could lead to truth. And he was relentless in preaching the truth that New Englanders had to be called back to who they were meant to be and become worthy of the shining house on a hill built in America by the first settlers. Pennsylvania. William Penn's holy experiment in the New World became the most populous and prosperous American colony. It was founded by Quakers from Great Britain who welcomed settlers of all denominations. This attracted Irish and German immigrants, as well as Native Americans from colonies to the south. Penn's Quaker values, freedom of worship and speech, liberty of conscience, the honoring of dissent, and reciprocal liberty, became Pennsylvania's values, making it more ethnically, culturally, and spiritually diverse than any other colony. Soon, prosperity made Philadelphia, the colony's largest city, the center of intellectual and commercial life in the British colonies. With this came the old world values that the forebears of the colony's farmers, laborers, artisans, and merchants had come to escape, and that their progeny would ultimately reject. In 1756, the Pennsylvania Journal said that the meanest among these thinks he has a right to civility from the greatest. Those so-called greatest had different ideas, and this difference became the fertile soil where an Anglican minister named George Whitefield sowed the seeds of dissent that would grow into a revolution. When Whitefield came to Savannah, Georgia with English evangelist John Wesley, he was horrified by the high mortality rate there and the effect it had on the city's children. In response, he established an orphanage, which he named Bethesda. But the orphanage needed funds to survive. So Whitefield left Savannah and spent the next 2 years traveling the colonies, raising those funds and doing what he did best, preaching. Whitefield preached with such passion and fervor that many traditional churches rejected him. So he preached outdoors, to such large crowds that he became the most popular minister in America.
When I see a congregation such as this, if my heart is in the proper frame, I feel myself ready to lay down my life, to be instrumental only to save one soul.
In 1740, Whitefield spoke to 8,000 people a day, every day, for a month. In Philadelphia, he attracted a crowd of 30,000. One of the faces in that crowd belonged to Benjamin Franklin, who became Whitfield's biggest booster and his publisher. What was the appeal of Whitfield's message to those hearers, Franklin among them? Whitfield spoke to people who were unsettled, unsure, and adrift. He spoke to them of their autonomous souls and a leveling of spiritual standing that would make them equal to their social betters. Like Jonathan Edwards, he challenged English commercialization and secularization, asking people to value their souls more than their purses. He appealed to values, principles, and higher truths. He pitted unnegotiable right against unconscionable wrong. These were the ideas that led to the First Great Awakening and began an intercolonial spiritual movement that paved the way to the Revolution. The Enlightenment introduced ideas about rights that emboldened political leaders. The Great Awakening introduced a language of dissent that emboldened the people to challenge conventional truths and distant authorities. What happened eventually in Philadelphia State House happened first in the churches. A societal identity crisis over what it meant to be an American fomented the First Great Awakening. The answers were penned by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, and later by the framers of the Constitution, who were influenced by Benjamin Franklin, whose world was changed the day he heard George Whitfield preach. Whitfield was at the right place, at the right time, with a message that inspired Americans to choose who they would become, rather than letting a foreign oligarchy make that choice for them.